So what question do you think we get asked the most in the comments of our videos? It's not like what's the best camera or specifics about how to shoot a certain thing or to do something specific in photography. The question we get asked all of the time in almost every video is, what lens should I get? What's the best lens? What lens do you use for this? Do you use for that? So I thought I'd take today and just kind of talk about different situations, different lenses, and I'm going to try to keep this short because I could talk all day about this stuff. So let's dive right in. So the first thing that most cameras, and I've by looking at the comments and looking at the analytics in our page, and the videos that we put out, most of the people that watch our videos are in the 25 to 35-year-old age range. And I'm thinking that there are a lot of newer photographers there. The videos that we do about more entry-level cameras by far get more views than what we do on our DSLRs or our mirrorless cameras that we use now. Like this is my Nikon Z6 II. The Canon M50 that I'm shooting on right now was by far a more popular camera as far as video views go. So I think there's a lot of new photographers out there, and they're looking for answers. So most cameras come with a kit lens. So for the Canon M50, that's this little lens right here. It's my 15 to, what is this thing? 15 to 45, which is basically the same equivalent as this, which is the 24 to 70, which is the kit lens for the Nikon Z6 II. And this is a great lens to start with. Most camera manufacturers are going to give you some version of that focal length. This one is an f4, constant f4 aperture. This one, it varies. I believe it goes up to, I think it's like 3.5 to 4.6 or 5.6, something like that. So generally the lenses, the more expensive they get, the lower apertures you'll have in the lenses. That's not always the case, but mostly that's what you're going to find when you're shopping for lenses. So what's the best lens? I mean, how do you answer that question? And that's literally the question that we get. What's the best lens? I have this camera. What would be the next best lens? What do you want to shoot? That's the question. What are you taking a photograph of? If you're a portrait photographer, I recommend these two lenses. This is a 70 to 200 2.8 and a 135 f2. Why? Because they both are low aperture numbers, which create a very shallow depth of field. They're telephoto. So when you're taking the photo, it's actually very pleasing to your subject's face. It doesn't compress them and make them look funny and squash their nose like a wide-angle lens would. And they create beautiful images. Now there are less expensive versions of these. You can get an f4 version of a 70 to 200. You can get an 85 millimeter 1.8 in all sorts of versions. So what I would recommend is if you're a portrait photographer, look inside your camera's line of lenses or third-party lens manufacturers that actually, produce lenses for your camera, and try to find something that's above 50 millimeters. Really above 70 millimeters would be best if you want to get into portrait photography. The lower the aperture, the more out of focus the background's going to be of your subject. So I hope that explains that. It's a portrait photography can get a little weird when you use kit lenses and wide-angle lenses. If you're using the 24 to 70 equivalent at the 70 millimeter end, you'll be fine. If you use it at the 24 millimeter end, it's going to smush your face of your subject and it's not going to be pleasing. So just be careful where you use zoom lenses in their zoom range. Landscape photography. I'm a landscape photographer and I have my kit lens. What's the next lens that you should get? Well, if it was me, I'd go with this one. This is a Nikon 16 to 35 f4. Takes filters on the front. In landscape photography, you're going to want to use a wider lens. You're going to want to capture the whole scene. Now, that doesn't mean there are not occasions when you will use other lenses. I've used telephoto lenses. I've used all my lenses in landscape situations. But in general, you're going to want a wide lens. So something in the 14 millimeter to 24 millimeter range. Okay, and you can buy a prime lens or you can get a zoom like this. And the reason why you want one that takes filters, if you can do it, if you can find one, or one that works with your camera that accepts filters, is because you can put ND filters on here and you can create movement. You can create movement in water, in the sky. You're able to do long exposures during the day. So that's something to think about when you're buying these lenses. Now, I have here, this is for the Canon M50, this is an 11 to 22. Okay? This is their version of this. And this lens is great. It's a nice, sharp, wide-angle lens. I believe it was about $500. There are less expensive, lenses that you can buy in these wider ranges. But generally, the more expensive ones are going to be sharper. They focus faster. Not that that's a big issue. And that's another thing with landscape photography. You don't need f2.8. So I don't know, unless you're doing astrophotography, but for general landscape photography, I find myself between f8 and f13 most often. And that's where I'm shooting. And so if I have a f2.8 lens that I spent, $1,500 on, or I use this little guy at f8, if they're both at f8, what's the difference? And I've actually done tests between these different lenses, and you get differences in corner sharpness and things like that, but you can get some really great landscape images out of a pretty inexpensive camera lens combination. As long as your technique's good, you use a tripod, you're shooting at ISO 100 and things like that. But generally for landscape photography, you're going to want to go wide, okay? Well, I like to do a little bit of everything. What's the next lens I should get? I want to take pictures of my family and kids, but I want to go on vacation and I want to take, pictures of, landscapes when I'm there, and maybe food photography, and, who knows? I just don't know, and I don't want to carry 50 lenses with me. Well, the kit lens is great, but if you want that one other second lens, the 50 millimeter is probably the one you're going to want in your bag. So depending on which version of the kit lens you have, chances are it's not going to be something with a really wide aperture like a 1.4 or a 1.8. And having a lens like this, which is a 50 millimeter, in your bag and ready to go is great when you're traveling as an all-around walk-around lens. If you want to do portraits, this is a 1.8, this one, but a 1.8 or a 1.4 aperture is going to really separate your subject from the background. You'll get beautiful images. If you're in a dark environment and your kit lens isn't really cutting it without you having to raise your ISO all the way up, then a 1.8 lens like this is going to come in very handy. So as a general all-around lens, a 50 millimeter 1.8, it's good for portraiture, good for just about anything, is great to have in your bag. A 35 millimeter would also be good. I'm shooting right now on a 35 millimeter equivalent f2 lens on my Canon M50. And as you can see, the background is a little bit out of focus. It's got nice separation between me and the background. It's sharp. This is an inexpensive lens. It was $200 for the Canon M50. And they make all sorts of different lenses. And if you have a new mirrorless camera but older lenses, or you find some older lenses that are, less expensive, you can always get an adapter. And you can adapt, for Nikon, you can adapt f-mount lenses. And for Canon, you can adapt EF lenses to your camera. And then it opens up the world, a lot more lenses to use. But for a general walk around, 35 millimeter would be great also. But the problem with 35 millimeters, if you're shooting portraits of a single person, it might not be as flattering as it could be if it was a 50 millimeter. But in most situations, it'll be fine. And you'll get some great images. It's a little bit wider than 50 millimeters, so it actually might be better for a walk around lens if you're traveling, doing things like that. Well, I want to get more creative with my photography. I have this 24 to 70, I have a 70 to 200, but I want to do something different. Well, that's where something like this comes in. Let's see if we can see that. You see that lens, how bulbous it is? Yeah, this is a great lens. Inexpensive. It's a Rokinon 8mm fisheye lens. And I have taken many, many fisheye images. I love this lens, and this will differentiate your images from what everybody else is shooting in any given situation. Takes a little bit of a learning curve to get used to it. It bends the world and makes everything look very unique. And while that's great, it also can, be a little tough to use when you're trying to set up a shot and figure out how you want things to look. But once you get the hang of it, you can get some really great images with a fisheye lens. So that's a lens that might be nice to have in your bag if you're looking to get more creative with your photography. There are macro lenses if you want to get into shooting close-up photography. So if that's what you think you want to do, you can get, a lens that's a macro lens, and that's going to really, let you focus super close to your subject. So, if I was taking a picture of my hand here, I could put the lens right up against it. Most lenses will not let you focus that close to something, but macro lenses are designed to do that. So most macro lenses can be used in a general sense also, and the one that I had used in the past is, I think it's a 60 millimeter Nikon macro lens that, works like a 60 millimeter lens in most situations, but you also have the ability to focus up close. So that's a nice way to, do something different with your photography. So there really is no best next lens. It really depends on what you want to shoot. And that comes down to the type of photographer you are, where you find yourself mostly, what situations. Do you need a lens that lets a lot of light in? So maybe you have to spend a little more money to get a wider aperture lens. Or are you outdoors mostly and taking pictures of your kids on a soccer field where you don't need an f2.8 telephoto lens? Maybe a 55 to 200, at f6.3 is fine for you. So something like that might work for you. So you really have to ask yourself what you want to do. And one of the videos I made was about this kit lens that comes with the Canon M50. It was a very popular video because I basically recommended not to do anything until you kind of figure out what kind of photographer you want to be. And just use the kit lens and start taking photos and see where you're drawn. Are you turning into a landscape photographer? Do you find yourself shooting a lot of parties and events and getting asked to do that kind of stuff where you maybe want to invest in some wide aperture lenses because you're going to be indoors? So these are the type of things that you're going to have to figure out for yourself. But in a general sense, I would say if you have a camera with a kit lens and you're looking for that next lens, I would go with a 50 millimeter 1.8, 1.4 if you can afford it. There are all sorts of 50 millimeters out there, from $99 ones to $1,000 50 millimeter lenses. So it really depends on your budget, your camera system, and what you want to do as far as with the images. Do you need a super, super sharp, or are you willing to just get something inexpensive to practice with? That really depends on you. So I hope this helped you out a little bit if you were one of those people asking, what should I do next? I have my camera. I want to get into photography a little bit more. I'm just not really sure. Okay, I'm going to put some videos here that kind of discuss lenses and, what you should use and why you should use them. And, hopefully they help you out. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.